How's everybody doing? Did we have a good day? All right. One of the things that I've been so pleased about over the years with BC Aware is the amount of support that we get from ISACA International. And we've got a great treat here. Over the years, the chairperson for ISACA International has come and attended our events. And today we have the global lead for our SheLeadsTech program. Joe Stewart-Rattray, sorry. I practiced that too. I know. Yeah, she's got my last name down pat, so that's even worse. Anyways, Joe is the chair of the Women's Leadership Advisory Council for ISACA International. She has come all the way from Australia to be with us today, so that's quite a trek. So thank you so much for making the effort to come here and be with us. As you know, SheLeadsTech is a program that we cherish here at ISACA Vancouver. We're fortunate enough to have won an award for our own SheLeadsTech program this year, so we're very proud of that. I want to give you a little bit of background on Jo. She has over 25 years of experience in the IT field, some of which were spent as the CIO as a CIO in the utilities space and as group CIO in the tourism space. She has significant experience in the information security arena, and she underpins her information security and technology background with her qualifications in education and management. Her keynote here today, I know, is going to be inspiring. She's going to talk to us about dreaming big and believing in ourselves. And so without further ado, come on up to the mic, come up to the stage, Joe.
Come on down. I was really waiting for him to say, come on down. Didn't happen, never mind. It's a good thing because I didn't need to run from the back of the room. I'm delighted at that too. So, Vancouver chapter, thank you so very much for having me. It's been an absolute delight. And I'm very lucky that every time I've come to Vancouver, I've stayed at this fantastic hotel. It's called the Pan Pacific. The other thing I'd like to do is, as you know, Australia has been burning. It's been terrible. I spent the 20th of December not knowing whether I was going to have to evacuate or not. But I want to say publicly, thank you, Canada. Hashtag thank you, Canada. You have sent us your superheroes in the form of volunteer firefighters. There is a wonderful woman somewhere here in BC who rallied a whole bunch of friends and colleagues to make things like bat wraps, yes, there is a thing, bird nests, and joey pouches and mitts for koalas who've had burned paws. She didn't know how she was going to get these amazing stuff, as well as a whole bunch of veterinary supplies to Australia. She lobbied Air Canada until they said yes, not just to one shipment, but to 6. So thank you, Canada. Also, hashtag thank you, Canada, hashtag superheroes wear yellow. Our firefighters all wear yellow. Round of applause, please. I'm serious when I say thank you. We have lost 4 of our own who have made the ultimate sacrifice while trying to save others. So it's been a terrible summer and we're only part the way through. So I'm actually delighted to see rain. Where I live, we've had precisely now 9 mils of rain in 6 months. Can you imagine that? Okay, now to the main story here. You know about SheLeadsTech, right? Well, in 2015, sitting in a boardroom on the ISACA International Board of Directors, which I had the great pleasure of serving on for 7 years, I was sitting in Brussels, Belgium, and it was a very new board year. I'd just been re-elected, and they were giving out portfolios. And They were getting around the room. My name had not been called. And I'm going, yay, I'm going to have a year where I'm just a board member. Fantastic. Then the then Chief Knowledge Officer, Ron Hale, stood up and said, oh, and there's a brand new program and a brand new portfolio that we're thinking about. Oh, that's nice. I wonder what that is. It's the Women's Initiative, and that goes to Joe Stewart-Rattray. Okay, so what have you got in mind, Ron? No, that's up to you, Joe. I only had myself to blame. I had been complaining for years that ISACA didn't have a women's program and we wanted to grow our female membership. So guess what? I got the job. So we started in 2016. In the meantime, Tara Wisniewski came on board and she and I began to work together on what we were going to do. At the end of 2015, early 2016, we held the very first CSX conference in Washington, DC. We decided to have a networking event for what was then called Connecting Women Leaders in Technology. It was completely oversubscribed, and at that event, I called for people who might want to be part of focus groups. And those focus groups were to determine whether actually our membership and our constituency really wanted this kind of a program. We thought we might get 1 or 2 focus groups filled, oversubscribed in 15 minutes. So it told us that really there was an absolute need for this program. So that's how we began. Now I'm going to tell you a story. And what's the very best way to start a story? Once upon a time, a long, long time ago, there was a little kid born to a blue-collar family in the Australian bush, 80 miles from the nearest big town. This little town that I lived in was literally the one-horse town. We had a pub, of course, a general store which was the post office as well, and we had a school, church and a hall. That was it. That was town. The postmistress, who used to also own the general store, had a problem with her geese getting out. So as an ambitious 2.5-year-old, I used to help her round them up. Apparently I was a great goose herd. Who would have known it, right? I won't tell you who let the geese out in the first place. So it was in that environment that I grew up. It was a fabulous place for kids. See the map here, if you look down to where there's a town called Warrnambool. I was 40 miles from Warrnambool, so literally in the middle of nowhere, but a gorgeous place to grow up. So it was in that environment that I began to dream. This kid, this 7-year-old kid in the heartland of Australia, had a dream. I had a big dream after seeing an Audrey Hepburn movie where she was working at the United Nations. I wanted to be her, not because of how beautiful she was or how incredibly glamorous, but I wanted to be her. I wanted to go to the United Nations and make a difference for people. So I followed her career, and she became a goodwill ambassador herself for the United Nations, for UNICEF in fact. And so there's me at 7 with the world's worst haircut because my mother was afraid of head lice. You know, the school only had 5 people in it, but she was worried about the head lice. And Audrey, and who is that other little girl? That's Audrey at 7. So I wonder what her dream was at 7. Did she ever imagine that she would grow up to be the woman that she was, fated around the world, and a goodwill ambassador? I don't know. Now, I'm not going to make you sit through the rest of my life. We could be here a little while. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of fast forward, but that just gives you the kind of background that I came from and where I had my big dream big moment, and I carried that dream big with me all of my life. I have this, and I've said it a few times to people here in the last couple of days, I have this real belief in making connections, and I think being a woman, I don't know whether men are the same or not, but women make fantastic connections with other women. And when they make those connections, they're generally fast, firm connections that last a lifetime. And these are some of my connections. And all I have to say about these connections is that if I weren't an ISACA member, if I hadn't hosted an event for SheLeadsTech in Canberra in 2017, I would not have had the opportunity of a lifetime. I hosted a SheLeadsTech lunch. I think it was the first one at a CACS conference in Oceania. And I was talking about, to a select group of high-profile women, trying to get that message out in our national capital, Canberra. And I was saying that, ISACA's a little bit late to the party with doing a women's program. So I think there's things that we can do. We can actually work together with coalitions of other organisations that are like-minded to us. And one of those I called out was UN Women. And I said, I'd love to get my feet under the table with our ambassador for women and girls and have a talk about how we could work together. Given that the UN is in 193 member states around the world, they work in the developing world, we work in the developing world, we're in 180 countries around the world. There seemed like there were perfect synergies, right? Well, as I was saying goodbye to my guests, a woman who's very high-powered in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet came up to me and said, Jo, I know you're going to be racing for an aircraft, but I'm going to send you a link to an opportunity that you must promise me you'll throw your hat in the ring for. Sure, Sandra, sure, not a problem, said I. So I get on the aircraft, go home to Adelaide. 2.5 hours later, get off the aircraft. And when you're standing, waiting for everybody to get off, because yes, I am one of those people who stands up, because by then I'm impatient, have a little bit of spare energy, got to get going. So I'm standing waiting, and I just flick on my phone, just because that's what you do. And sure enough, there's a text comes up, and there is a link. So I open the link, and I'm standing there on an aircraft. Remember, I'm sort of at row about 6C or something. And I'm standing there going, oh shit, bother, oh bother, oh no. No, I can't do that. Yes, I can do that. No, I can't. Yeah. So I'm doing the same thing that I tell women that I mentor not to do, right? Because the opportunity was to put in a submission to potentially be one of only 2 civil society representatives to join the Australian Government official delegation to the United Nations 62nd session of the Commission on the Status of Women. Thank you. And I went, oh Lord, no, this is way too much for me, right? So I wrestled with it and I contacted a couple of my pals at HQ, Tara Wisniewski and Alicia Vence, and said, look, what am I going to do about this? There's this opportunity and do you want me to have a go at it? Now, our American cousins, right? So what do you think they said? Hell yeah! Okay, now, the trick in this story is that this is Thursday night. The submission has to be in on Sunday morning at 11 a.m. No more than 4 pages. In fact, it's something weird like 3.5 pages, to tell them why I should be a member of that group, that august group. And I'm going, oh my Lord. Anyway, so I go through all of that, yes, no, having a little, in my den, having a little chat with myself in the corner saying, don't be ridiculous, you can do this. And I'm backwards and forwards, and I have to say, Tara and Alicia were fabulous. They were really helpful. I would flick what I'd written, they'd critique it, we'd have a chat about it. And so really, it was without that connection, I wouldn't have had the opportunity. So I put it in, I pressed send at, I think it was 10 a.m, so about an hour before the deadline on the Sunday morning, and I felt sick. And I thought, oh, well, I've had a crack, right? Good Aussie expression, I've had a crack, I'm all right. At least it was, like what an honour to be actually thought of. all of that stuff. Anyway, a few weeks went by, and I'm in the middle of giving a presentation in Melbourne for SheLeadsTech. Yeah, I do spend a bit of time on aircraft. And there's this, my phone is beeping in my pocket. And I'm thinking, what's that all about? So in the break, I have a look. Not a number that I know. So I ring it. Hi, I'm the Director of International Engagement for the Office of the Prime Minister and Cabinet Office for Women. I went, yeah, thinking this is it. Thanks, Joe, but no thanks, Well, at least I had a crack. And she said, I'm just wondering when you'd be available for an interview. Let me check my diary. I'm going to move heaven and hell, right? So we agreed a time, and then I got nervous, really nervous. So it came the day, had the interview, and of course, you can tell I quite like a chat. People have said I'd speak underwater with marbles in my mouth. Could be some truth in it. Anyway, so they asked me this, I thought, dopey question. What is your role in civil society? Smarty pants here. I live in it? No, that's not the answer. So I quickly start talking about my role with SheLeadsTech, with my role with Zonta, National Rural Women's Coalition, and so I think, I think I might have gotten out of that all right, don't know. So I got off the phone and again felt sick because I thought, well, I've just buggered that up I've just messed that up by being a smarty pants, So anyway, I waited. My phone rang a couple of hours later, and it was a great friend of mine, ex-chair of the ISACA Board of Directors, Tony Hayes, and Tony said to me, Jo, I think you might be going to New York. Really, why? Not equating the two things, but Tony was one of my referees. And he said, because they've just given me a referee, just asked me to do a referee check for you. And he said, I basically told them they'd be mad not to take you. And his title at the time was Deputy Director General, Department of Communities, Queensland Government. Sounds impressive, right? It is. And the moral of this story, ladies, is that, and gentlemen, always make sure that you have a referee who's prepared to lie for you. So, again, I'm presenting on SheLeadsTech, but this time in Sydney, and I get the phone call. I'm on stage. No, I'm not answering that. I can't answer that, I'm on the stage. So, I just wait, and my pocket just keeps ringing and ringing and ringing. And so I got off the stage, and there's a text as well saying, please call the Director International Engagement, Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet Office for Women. Don't you love these short government titles? And so she said to me, oh, Jo, I've got some news for you. I went, here it is. This is it. This is the thanks, but no thanks. Jo, do you want to come to New York in March with us? Yes, I think so. Let me check my diary. No, of course. I said, of course, I'd love to. And I just got off the phone, and I'm not a woman who cries easily, but let me tell you, there was a lump in my throat. I thought, I'm actually going. Then I get a phone call saying, oh, Jo, we've got a little bit of a problem. There's going to be a ministerial shuffle, so you're going to be under embargo. You are not going to be able to tell anybody that you're going to New York until it's announced by the minister. Right, 2 ministerial shuffles later, and 3.5 months, 2 days before we actually were going to appear in public as the delegation, it's finally announced. But the thing about that is you have to be so careful who you do tell, because there are some people you're going to have to tell, right? If this ever happens to you, that you're under embargo for something. I had to tell my husband, who, as some of you heard me say before, is an amazing man and incredibly supportive of me. But his first thing was, being a professional musician, can I tell the guys when I get to rehearsal? No! If one of them tells the wrong person, I'm out. And so I had to tell our managing partner at work because, I'm saying no to work in March, and I never say no to work in March, right? So there were a few people, and it suddenly got to the point where there were about 10 people that knew, and I thought, I'm going to be in for trouble anytime soon. So again, if you're in that situation, make sure the people that you tell will not only lie for you, but can keep stum as well. So, off we go to New York. Oh my gosh. I had to go to an ISACA board meeting in Nashville, Tennessee before. And I have to say it was a great way to start, you know, Stetsons and boots and doing all of that stuff and then getting really togged up and posh going to New York and wait till you hear what the very first thing I had to do was. I had to go to the ambassador's residence. So the Australian ambassador to the United Nations. All of those cups and saucers on the table have the coat of arms of Australia on them in gold leaf. This is an amazing apartment that overlooks the East River. Australia owns the whole building. Who knew? But what was amazing about that, this comes back down to connections again. The women that were there was the Minister for Women, the Ambassador for Australia, the Ambassador for Women and Girls, and 3 commissioners from the Human Rights Commission of Australia, and then a whole bunch of very senior DFAT, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, people. And we sat down at the table, and the first thing the Minister gives a little spiel, and then she said, "I'd like you all to tell me what your journey to get here was." I didn't know I was going to have to speak in this very intimate environment to these incredibly powerful women. Again, I have that problem with faith in myself. You know, I'm sort of going, oh my God, what am I going to do? Anyway, the Social Justice Commissioner for Indigenous People, June Oscar, spoke just before me. And she sort of threw it across the table, "Joe, it's your turn now." I'm going... So I told a very shortened story about being the kid from the bush, and they were really impressed that I was a rural woman, and I still live in the bush. So that was, but June, if it hadn't have been for June sitting across the table from me and doing all those things like, you know, good positive body language, smile at me, and I'd say something and she'd nod, I'm going, and so I ended up by looking at her, you know, because she's giving me all those cues that I need to get me through. So look for the ally in the room, right? She was great. So, and then we went off to a cocktail party at the Australian Consulate General, which we were told to make it feel like it was our home for our 2.5 weeks in New York City. Go down and read the newspapers if you like. Yeah, sure. I'm just toddling off to the Consulate General now. So, then it began. The dreams for a kid from the bush was about to come true, and I recognised it in the photo on the far left. That's the forecourt, and you've all seen that. If you've not been there, you've still all seen it on television with the avenue of flags. And that, I have to tell you, is the coldest place on God's earth. There is a wind that whips through the buildings off that East River that would chill you to the bone. And for a kid who'd just come out of the Australian summer where it was 44 degrees, I was dying. And there were still blocks of snow, and it hadn't snowed for 2 weeks. So, what can I tell you? The Director of International Engagement, tough woman, ex-military, no messing with her, right? As we were about to walk, we walked down through, there's a corridor of flags, we walked through the corridor of flags and into the lobby of the General Assembly, and she just stopped and turned around and said to me, "Joe, if you don't feel an emotion when you walk into this room, I'll be very surprised." Well, you'll never guess what. For a woman who doesn't cry, guess what I did? We don't cry in security, right? Good Lord, here I am with tears dripping down my face, and she said, "I told you so." Excellent, thanks, Rach. So the photo of me holding my coat, we have literally just arrived into the General Assembly. I still have tears in my eyes. During the opening speech, the Secretary-General, who you've heard me say a couple of times today, I'm a great fan of, said, "I am a committed feminist." We need to take the power back. Otherwise, we will be living in a male-dominated world forever. Can you imagine? In a room with probably 800 people in it, that is never silent. When you have that many people in a room, it is never silent. But you could hear a pin drop when he made that statement. An amazing man. One of the things that we as a delegation committed to was to never leave the Australia desk without somebody on it. We thought it was disrespectful to the Commission on the Status of Women, and indeed to our fellow countrymen and women, if we were not sitting there. So guess what happened to me on day one at about 11 o'clock in the morning? "Jo, you'll take a turn at the desk, won't you?" The General Assembly is in session and I'm the only one left at the desk. Minister goes that way, 2 ambassadors that way, and 2 commissioners the other. I'm left there and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's going to be one of those times if somebody asks me a question, I'm going to have to do that American courtroom thing and say, "I'll take it under advisement." You'll be delighted to know I didn't have to do that, I just had to take a lot of notes. So my role was to be the technical advisor to the Australian government delegation, because the way things work at the United Nations is that you are there to map a roadmap for the 193 member states on a particular subject for the next 6 years. The theme for the session was empowering rural women and girls through the use of technology. So now it's making a bit more sense why I was there, right? So you have to take into consideration that we are dealing with 193 member states, some of which are developing nations, some are definitely third world nations, and some are nations like Canada, the US and Australia, developed first world nations. But we start off with what's called a zero draft, which is what we propose moving forward for that 6-year period. Every paragraph has to be agreed by all member states. Can you imagine how difficult that is, to even agree what infrastructure means, to determine what harmful practices might mean, to determine what constitutes women in all their diversity? You know, I have now the greatest respect for the work of the United Nations. And if I had have known earlier, I probably would have looked to be a peacekeeper. I have so much respect for the work that is done. These photographs show us in session. This one with the lady in the red jumper, that was my other colleague who was a civil society delegate, and we're with the Minister of Women having a bit of a laugh before a session in the General Assembly. Then, photo down here, the lady you can see with the long hair was the Australian government's chief negotiator. An amazing woman, and what also really sort of opened my eyes was about diplomacy and how it actually works, the alliances that are formed. And it brings me back to business. We form alliances in business, and it taught me a lot about how to build alliances, and also how to not necessarily, it might be your idea, not necessarily have it come out of your mouth. It might be better if it comes from somebody else. And Penny Mortimer, our chief negotiator, was fantastic on doing that. My role was to give advice and to be conduit to my civil society representatives who were not in the room. Only the negotiators are allowed in the room, and the advisors. So we might have some people outside who are absolute experts in a particular field. One question at 2 o'clock in the morning I had to go and get an answer for was, at what point does personhood begin? So we're dealing with really controversial issues here. By the way, it's when the first breath is drawn, in case you're wondering. Now, you're probably wondering about the little guy down here, the little fella that's my travelling companion. My husband gave him to me in 1992, and he has travelled with me ever since. So he was taking some notes that night. He's Gus the travelling bear. And we did work long into the night, as you can see in this photo, because sometimes you have to stop. You have to stop and break up into bilateral or multilateral discussions to get a point through, so as people actually understand. It's interesting when it comes to Australia. We seem to be fairly neutral in many regards. There's a number of groups that we sit in. Obviously the Pacific Forum, because we're part of in the Pacific. We're part of CANS, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. And we're also part of Mountains, which is the non-EU European countries. I don't know how we got there, but we are. So again, part of that really strong way of getting the point across, the power plays, we actually all would sit in a huge semicircle together, that whole group of people. So, you have probably 20 nations. And so that actually is a very strong power play. The other thing I'll just tell you is that Australia, Canada and New Zealand do a lot of work together very closely. And those countries all send diplomats to the United Nations. Our US cousins, on the other hand, send high-powered Washington DC lawyers. No one's surprised. That shocked the socks off me. One of the things too was one of the most powerful things that happened late at night. This, by the way, was 2 o'clock in the morning. And you can see that people are having a bit of a snooze, a bit tired. He's messing about at the back there. Bit tired. The lady with the white trench coat, Australian Department of Trade and Foreign Affairs, fairly important person. Switzerland is having a nap. Nigeria are having a gossip. Ghana's on the nod. Norway's up the back going, well, will you get on with it? But it was after one of these discussions that we had worked until, I think, 5, it was getting close to 5 o'clock in the morning, and a gentleman stood up and said, when they were talking about female human rights defenders in the field, said, that's it. That's a red line for us. And once you have a red line, it means you can't go any further. You can't finish unless that red line is taken away. So I saw these diplomats suggesting they make an intervention and stand and say, we think we need to break into multilateral or bilateral discussions. Okay, so that's allowed. They took this guy outside, and quite honestly, they looked so dark, I thought they were going to go outside and pummel him to bits. And so I said to one of our diplomats, I said, so are they going to go and give him a thumping? I said, no, Joe, we're diplomats, we don't do that, but they might give him a verbal thumping. So we'll pick that one up in a while. So as those discussions were going on and they were giving this chap a verbal thumping, our mate from Iceland next door said, have you got your gentleman bear with you tonight? And I said, yes, I have. He pops out of the bag. It's about time he addressed the assembly, I think. So it was my mate next door who set Gus up and took lots of photos. So that's what you can do. You do get a little bit bored, and as there's no coffee available after 6 p.m, you end up by drinking a lot of water and eating a lot of protein bars. There was a statement made that night when we came back together that said, it was Brazil stood and said, further to the discussion on female human rights defenders in the field, I should let the Assembly know that Mary Ellen Franco, who is a well-known Brazilian female human rights defender, was beaten badly 2 nights ago, and I have just had word that she has passed away. Again, a pin dropped. So the fellow who had redlined this whole idea of protecting these women who were working in the field, you could see he was looking a little uncomfortable. So Sharon from DFAT and I walked back to the hotel at 10 to 6 in the morning. It was our last night, and it was, at what point are we going to actually get an agreed conclusion? If not everybody agrees to everything, there is no roadmap moving forward. And this last time the theme came up, there had been no agreed conclusions. So we were terrified. Well, there were 32 paragraphs still to agree. We had until 4 o'clock the next afternoon. So we went back to the hotel, and we both said, it's not going to happen. Nice try, but it's not going to happen. The next day, we went back and paragraphs fell one after the other. We determined what technology infrastructure actually meant. We determined how technology could assist women with education, because let's not forget, in many countries there is no sanitation for women, so 1 week a month young women cannot go to school. So if they can't go to school, they drop behind their male peers. So that was established. We established how forced marriage or early marriage can affect a woman's opportunity to work and to be economically independent. So we arrived at a position on that and how technology can then economically assist women and how they can remain safe by virtue of having one of those things that always rings in my pocket at the wrong time. So the final gavel was about to go down with no agreed conclusion when old mate who'd redlined us stood up and said, I have spoken to Capital, which is UN terms for I've rung head office at home, I've rung the equivalent of Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and we no longer redline that. There was a huge sigh of relief and a lot of clapping. However, the thing about that was we don't actually think he had rung Capital. We think he made that as a unilateral decision, and from the country that man is from, he probably would be arrested on arrival home. He has not been sent at the UN since. A very brave move, and you see this happen. Countries break away from country blocks. Individuals make decisions like that because they know it's for the betterment of the world. So the final gavel went down. And I thought it's actually very stressful, and I thought this would be something that I would just be relieved it was over. But you know what? It was the greatest sense of joy. And there was a shriek and a yell, and everyone's hugging everyone else. There was this gorgeous, really tall African lady who just swept me off my feet and gave me a big hug and kiss on both cheeks, and I still don't even know her name. And I just suddenly realised, and you'll never guess what happened, I bloody cried again. I suddenly realised my lifelong dream had come true. I had indeed made a difference for rural women and girls, far beyond my expectations globally. Had it not been for the SheLeadsTech program, had it not been for the connections that women make, had it not been for a supportive family, it would never have happened for me. So I determined at that point there had to be next steps. It couldn't be left at that. So we took SheLeadsTech on the road, and there's a part 2 to this story, so ask me back next year and I'll tell you part 2. I also went back to the United Nations in 2019, so there's a whole other story. So I was asked by my friend's daughter, Caitlin, whether she could meet Gus, because her mum had shown her Gus's travels on Facebook, so she wanted to meet Gus. But what she really wanted to do was to ask me if I would be her sponsor into a nationwide technology competition for juniors. Well, of course I said yes. She's a redhead, why would I not? Dear. So she not only won her local division, she went on to the Nationals and came second at the Nationals. So I realised that it's not just the women who are currently in the workforce, but we need to grab those young girls early, just as the Girl Guides were telling us today. So very much in alignment with my own thinking. And I have continued to work in the space of women's rights, I suppose. I've become very actively involved in the National Rural Women's Coalition and the Rural, Regional and Remote Communications Coalition. Now, just a few thoughts to leave you with. On my return, a friend of mine gave me this, alias proprius volat, and it's become my sort of motto, if you like. She flies with her own wings, but I do have to tell you, occasionally I have to get airlines to assist me because it's just too big a flap from Adelaide to get here. We were coming back from the UN in 2018, and I'd shouted myself an upgrade to first class on Qantas, and the captain came because the customer services manager, who I knew quite well, had told him that one of the UN delegates was on board. And so when we landed in Sydney, he took me up to the flight deck with Gus. Gus actually stayed with him for a bit longer. I'm not quite sure what was going on there. I'd just like to really, final thoughts are, this is one of your newest residents said this when she addressed the United Nations. I'm talking of the Duchess of Sussex. Still don't know who's going to pay for the security, but it is said that girls with dreams become women with vision. May we empower each other to carry out such vision, because it isn't enough to simply talk about equality. One must believe in it. And it isn't enough to simply believe in it, one must work at it. Let us work at it together, starting now. Also, another thought from another Australian, Ashley Barty, world's #1 tennis player, when she won the Adelaide International last Saturday night. She said, "Be true to yourself and chase your dreams." I'd go on and say, believe in yourself, be authentic, and if you dream big and you believe, it may take a lifetime, but it will happen. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Well, thank you. And